The rain hammered the windshield, a relentless drumbeat that blurred the world into streaks of gray and black. Ethan forced his eyes to track the road, but the asphalt had become a slick, treacherous mirror reflecting nothing but the dark. He tightened his grip on the steering wheel, his fingers locked in place, fighting the hydroplaning tires that skidded with every minor correction. The wipers slapped back and forth, failing to clear the deluge. He leaned forward, squinting through the glass, trying to find the edge of the lane. Then, the darkness ahead fractured. Two blinding beams of light erupted from the gloom, cutting through the downpour and hitting his eyes like physical blows. He slammed his foot onto the brake, but the pedal offered no resistance, sliding uselessly beneath his boot. The oncoming vehicle surged closer, its high beams swallowing the cabin. Ethan yanked the wheel hard to the right, his body bracing for the inevitable. The tires screamed against the wet pavement, a high-pitched wail that rose above the storm. The car lurched, the rear end fishtailed. The guardrail caught the front bumper with a sound like grinding metal teeth. Sparks showered the windshield as the car pivoted, slamming its side into the steel barrier with a force that rattled Ethan's teeth. The glass shattered, spraying inward in a glittering cascade. The vehicle spun, a sickening rotation that threw Ethan against the doorframe, then slammed to a halt, nose down against the twisted metal. Then, the world stopped. The engine died. The tires ceased their shrieking. The rain continued to drum against the roof, but it sounded distant, muffled by the ringing in his ears. Ethan sat frozen, his hands still locked onto the wheel, though the car was no longer moving. He stared through the spider-webbed cracks in the glass at the dark, rain-slicked woods beyond. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic, irregular rhythm that filled the void left by the crash. He tried to draw a full breath, but his lungs felt constricted, trapped by the sudden, heavy silence of the cabin. He blinked, his vision swimming with dark spots, and forced his gaze toward the passenger side. The air inside the car felt thin, suffocating. He only listened to the rain. Ethan shoved the driver's side door, but it groaned against the crumpled frame. He hammered his shoulder against the metal until it gave way with a screech of tearing steel. He tumbled out, landing hard on his knees in the thick, cold mud. He stood, his legs shaking, and leaned back into the cabin. Lily remained slumped against the door, her head lolling toward the center console. Her chest rose and fell in a shallow, rhythmic motion, a fragile pulse against the backdrop of the wreckage. Ethan stared at her. He could see the faint smear of dark liquid on her temple. He reached out, his fingers hovering inches from her shoulder, but he pulled back as if burned. He did not check her pulse. He did not reach for his phone. He did not call for help. The weight of the situation pressed down on him, a physical pressure that demanded action he refused to take. He backed away from the car, his boots sinking deep into the saturated earth. He looked toward the road, then toward the dense, impenetrable wall of the forest. The choice solidified in the pit of his stomach. He turned his back on the wreckage, took a heavy, sucking step away from the light of the interior, and walked into the dark. Ethan did not look back. He pushed through the first line of trees, the branches whipping against his face like stinging wires. Every step was a struggle against the saturated ground. His boots sank deep, creating a wet, sucking sound that seemed to echo. He forced his pace higher, his breath coming in sharp, ragged gasps that burned in his throat. He tried to slow down, to find his footing on the uneven terrain, but the image of the car behind him pushed him forward. He stumbled over a protruding root, his hands clawing at the air before he regained his balance. He did not stop to check for injury. He ran with his head down, his focus narrowed to the patch of mud immediately in front of his feet. The darkness was absolute. He reached a dense thicket, branches tearing at his skin, but he plowed through. His lungs felt as though they were filled with hot ash. He was running away from the reality he had left behind in the wreckage. He was a man possessed by the urge to vanish entirely. The ground beneath Ethan's boots changed abruptly. The solid earth gave way to a steep, downward slope carpeted in thick, slick moss. He tried to halt his momentum, digging his heels into the incline, but the surface offered zero resistance. His right foot slid forward, slicing through the wet vegetation. He windmilled his arms, grasping for a sapling or a root, but his fingers found only empty air. Gravity claimed it. He pitched forward, his body rotating as he tumbled into the void. The first impact was a heavy thud against a thick tree trunk, knocking the wind from his chest. He spun, his shoulders slamming into a jagged rock outcrop. The world became a blur of dark shapes and rushing wind. He struck a second tree, his body rebounding with a sickening crack. He rolled over the uneven terrain, limbs flailing, unable to find an anchor. He hit a final, protruding stone ledge, his momentum halted by the sheer force of the collision. He came to a dead stop at the base of the ravine. His body settled into the mud, twisted at an unnatural angle. The rain continued to fall, washing over him as he lay motionless. Miles away, the silence inside the car was broken by a shallow, ragged intake of breath. Lily stirred. Her eyes flickered open, struggling to focus in the dim, rain-streaked interior. A sharp pain radiated from her forehead, where a dark trickle of blood obscured her vision. She reached out, her fingers trembling as they brushed against the twisted metal of the passenger door. It was jammed. She pushed against the frame with both hands, her muscles straining, but the door held firm. She braced her feet against the floorboard and shoved. With a screech of tortured metal, the door gave way, swinging outward into the downpour. She tumbled out, landing hard on the wet asphalt. The cold rain hit her skin like needles, shocking her into full awareness. She did not look back at the wreckage. She crawled toward the center of the road. In the distance, two beams of light cut through the gloom. A truck approached. Lily pulled herself upright, waving her arms in a frantic, uneven rhythm. The truck slowed, its brakes hissing. The driver stepped out. Lily pointed a shaking finger toward the dark line of the woods. "He went that way," she whispered. The sky turned a bruised, pale gray as dawn broke over the forest. The search party moved in a disciplined line, their boots crushing wet ferns and rotting leaves. High-intensity spotlights mounted on portable generators hummed, casting long, erratic shadows that danced between the ancient trunks. The light beams cut through the lingering mist, searching for any sign of movement or disruption. They moved past the dense thickets, their voices calling out into the damp silence, receiving no response. One officer swung his light toward the steep decline of the ravine, the beam sweeping over the uneven mud and tangled roots. He paused, adjusting the angle as the light caught a patch of unnatural stillness at the very bottom. The beam locked onto the base of the slope. It illuminated the mud-caked ground and the figure lying motionless against the stones. The light traveled upward, revealing a face drained of color. Ethan lay with his neck at a sharp, unnatural angle, his eyes wide and unblinking, fixed in a permanent, hollow stare. The searchers signaled the rest of the team. The search team worked with practiced, heavy movements. They secured the body onto the metal stretcher, the straps clicking shut with a sound that echoed through the clearing. 4 men gripped the handles, their boots digging deep into the soft, rain-soaked earth as they began the grueling climb up the slope. The incline was steep and treacherous, forcing them to coordinate every step. Halfway up, the front of the stretcher snagged on a thick, exposed root. The team halted, their breath hitching in the cold morning air as they adjusted their footing to keep the load level. They heaved in unison, muscles straining against the weight, and finally crested the ridge. Lily sat in the back of the ambulance, her legs dangling over the edge, her gaze fixed on the approaching line of men. The white sheet was pulled tight over the frame, obscuring everything beneath it. She watched the rhythmic, heavy gait of the team as they navigated the uneven ground. Every step brought the reality of the night into sharper focus. She did not look away. She sat perfectly still, her eyes tracking the slow, deliberate progress of the men. The team reached the threshold of the ambulance. The stretcher slid onto the metal tracks with a harsh, grinding sound. Lily sat motionless, her gaze locked on the white shroud. The fabric was damp, clinging to the shape beneath it. She reached down, her fingers digging into the rough wool of the blanket draped over her legs. She pulled the material tight until her knuckles turned white, the strain in her hands the only movement in her body. The paramedics moved with efficient, detached motions, securing the stretcher and preparing to close the doors. The cold air bit at her skin, but she did not shiver. She looked at the white sheet one last time. The irony was a sharp physical pressure in her chest. He had sprinted into the dark to escape, and now he was being carried back into the light. She did not speak. She did not cry. Instead, she shifted her weight, turned her head away from the stretcher, and stared out into the empty road. The ambulance doors swung shut, sealing the space, leaving her alone with the quiet, hollow truth of the morning.